At 4:30 in the morning in Mayo, Yukon, a wood stove came back to life under the hand of a trapper's wife. She tipped a cast iron skillet into the heat and lifted a glob of sourdough starter older than her marriage from a cracked enamel crock. Number 22 on this list was the first thing every new arrival in Whitehorse learned to fry. Number 17 was a slab of meat the road crews carried through 40 below. Number 8 on this list cost less than a dime in 1956. These 25 breakfasts fed gold miners, trappers, dog mushers, and the children of Whitehorse through winters when the temperature held below -30. None of these were banned. The grocery store just replaced the pantry shelf the day the highway opened year-round. Hit subscribe before this list ends. Here are the 25 forgotten Yukon breakfasts from the 1950s that have disappeared. Number 25. Yukon sourdough hotcakes. The starter sat in a crock on the back of the stove all night, breathing in the warm air above the firebox. By dawn, it had a thin film of liquid on top that the old-timers called hooch. The trapper's wife stirred it down, added flour and a pinch of salt, and dropped batter the size of saucers into a skillet greased with bacon fat. The hot cakes came up dense, tangy, and the size of a dinner plate. A miner could eat 3 with a pour of carnation evaporated milk and a smear of wild blueberry jam, and not think about food again until supper. The starter itself was treated like a family member. You did not let it die. Some of the starters in Dawson City had been alive since 1898, fed every day for 50 years straight by women who had never seen the inside of a bakery. The starter was the inheritance, passed from mother to daughter the way another household might pass down a christening cup. That was the whole breakfast. Number 24. Fried kalim and bannock. Kalim was powdered milk spelled backwards, sold in a yellow tin that every Yukon kitchen kept on the shelf above the stove. People mixed it with Cold Creek water, beat the lumps out with a fork, and poured it over a slab of bannock fried in lard. The bannock came out of a cast iron pan the size of a wagon wheel, golden on both sides, smelling of wood smoke. A child eating this in Carcross in 1953 might have a tin cup of tea beside it, sweetened with 3 spoons of white sugar from a paper sack. Clim never quite tasted right, that powdered chalk note your grandmother grew up hating, but it was the only milk a household had between September and June. The road did not open, the barge did not run, the cellar held no fresh dairy. The KLAM tin was the cow, and the bannock was the bull, and a working family had no other choice for 9 months of the year. The yellow tin sat on the shelf year after year, and the children ate it because there was nothing else. Number 23. Caribou liver fried with onion. A hunter back from a fall hunt on the Dempster brought home the liver wrapped in cheesecloth, and his wife sliced it thin while it was still cold from the cellar. She dredged the slices in flour, salted them heavy, and laid them in a skillet of bubbling lard. The onions went in first, sliced thick, fried until they collapsed into a sticky brown tangle. Then the liver, 2 minutes aside, no more. You ate it on a tin plate with a slab of fried bannock to mop up the iron-rich juice. A working man in the bush could not afford to skip iron in the dead of January. The Gwich'in families along the Porcupine River had been eating liver this way for centuries before the cast iron skillet showed up on the trade list. The cookware changed. The recipe did not. A whole liver fed a family of 6 for 2 breakfasts and a supper, with the leftovers going into a pate thinned with rendered fat for the children's sandwiches. The plate was simple. The iron was free. The recipe was old. Number 22. Sourdough flapjacks with bacon drippings. These were thinner than the hotcakes, the size of your hand, stacked 4 high on a warm plate. The trick was the drippings. A woman saved every spoon of bacon fat in a mason jar by the stove, and that jar was the cooking medium for everything from spring to freeze up. The flapjacks fried in a 1/4 inch of pure pork fat, edges crisping into a brown lace, the center staying tender. You ate them with a pour of Rogers Golden Syrup, a Vancouver brand that came up the river by barge and lasted in a tin can for years. Every new arrival to Whitehorse learned to fry these in their first winter because nothing else stretched a sack of flour as far. A pound of flour and a starter could feed a household for a week. The flapjack was the cheapest hot breakfast in the North, the one your grandmother taught your mother before she could read, the one that disappeared the day the supermarket opened on 2nd Avenue. Number 21, fried Spam and eggs. The Spam came in a blue tin can, a leftover from the Alaska Highway construction camps that kept arriving in Yukon kitchens through the 1950s. A man working on a placer claim sliced it 1/4 of an inch thick and dropped it in a hot skillet, where the sugar in the meat caramelized into a brown crust. He cracked 2 eggs beside it, scrambled them in the rendered fat, and ate the whole plate standing at the cookhouse counter before the sun came up. Eggs were a luxury in winter, shipped frozen from Edmonton, sometimes powdered if the road was closed. A working man did not ask which kind. The Spam was always there. The Americans had left enough of it stockpiled in 1946 to feed the territory for a decade. A tin cost 28 cents at the Hudson's Bay store and fed 2 men through a working morning. A pot of Quaker old-fashioned oats went on the back of the stove the night before, soaked in cold water with a fistful of salt. By morning, the oats had bloomed into a thick gray mash, and a Yukon mother stirred it slow over a low flame for 20 minutes. The carnation evaporated milk came in a small can, and you punched 2 holes in the top with a knife, so you could pour a thin white river over the porridge. A spoon of brown sugar went on top, melted into a dark glaze. A child ate this in a kitchen in Beaver Creek with the temperature reading -50 outside, and that bowl was the difference between making it to school and turning back. The porridge was insulation for the day. A bowl held you upright until lunch, the way nothing else in the pantry could. Number 19, smoked salmon strips with pilot biscuits. The salmon strips were dried over alder and cottonwood smoke for 2 weeks in a cabin near the Yukon River until they turned a deep, iridescent red and the texture of leather. A Han fisherman handed them down to the trader, who handed them to the cook at a railway boarding house in Whitehorse, and that cook served them on a tin plate with a sleeve of pilot biscuits and a tin cup of strong black tea. The pilot biscuits had been in the pantry since the steamer came up in August, hard as a saucer, and you soaked them in your tea until they softened enough to bite. The salmon you tore with your fingers, salty and oily, and the smoke flavor stayed on your hands until noon. A working breakfast for 3 cents a head, eaten standing at the counter, finished before the day shift bell rang. Number 18, fried potatoes and onions. The potatoes came out of a root cellar dug under the kitchen floor, where they kept from October to April without ever freezing. A Yukon homesteader sliced them thick with the skins on, dropped them into a skillet of bacon fat, and let them sit untouched for 10 minutes until the bottoms turned a dark mahogany. Then she flipped them, laid sliced onions on top, and covered the pan with a tin lid until the onions slumped. You ate this with a fork standing at the kitchen table, the potatoes crisp and salty, the onions sweet from the long fry. A homesteader in Pelly Crossing could eat this every morning for 6 months and not get bored, because the alternative was no breakfast at all. The cellar was the kitchen, the cellar was the grocery store, and the bag of potatoes had to last until June. Number 17, moose sausage patties with sourdough toast. A hunter killed a moose in November on the Klondike Highway, and the meat went straight to the butcher's hook on the back porch where it froze hard inside a day. By December, the woman of the house had ground 20 pounds of shoulder meat through a hand-crank grinder, mixed it with rendered pork back fat, sage from a tin, brown sugar, and salt, and pressed the mixture into patties the size of her palm. She stacked them in butcher paper between layers of newsprint and stored them in a wooden crate on the back porch. On a January morning at 4:30, with the wood stove cracking the cold out of the kitchen, she pulled 3 patties from the crate, laid them in a cold cast iron skillet, and turned the heat to medium. The fat rendered out in a slow sizzle. The sage came forward, and the brown sugar caramelized along the edges into a sticky crust. She fried 2 thick slices of sourdough bread in the rendered mousse fat, and the bread soaked up everything the patties left behind. Her husband ate this standing at the door in his canvas mackinaw, the plate balanced on the wood box, 2 patties and 2 slices of bread inside 3 minutes. He had a trap line to walk before sunrise. What most people miss about a Yukon kitchen in 1955 is that the freezer was the back porch, and the back porch ran the whole pantry. The moose had fed his family for 6 months by the time the snow melted, and not 1 ounce of that animal had gone to waste. The hide was tanned, the bones were boiled for soup, the marrow was spooned into the morning porridge for the children. That was how you ate in the bush in 1955. Nothing was wasted because nothing could be replaced. The grocery store in Whitehorse was 300 miles south by a road that closed in October. The patties on the plate were the calendar. Number 16. Cornmeal mush with brown sugar. A bag of yellow cornmeal arrived on the spring barge into Mayo, and a household stretched it through the summer into October. You boiled water, poured the cornmeal in a slow stream while stirring with a wooden spoon, and watched it thicken into a yellow paste over the course of 15 minutes. A pour of carnation milk on top, a spoon of dark brown sugar, and that was breakfast for a child of 7 on the Stewart River. The cornmeal had a grit your grandmother loved and your grandchildren refused to eat. A working family ate the leftovers cold the next morning, sliced into slabs and fried in lard like polenta, dipped in dark molasses. Nothing was thrown out. The cornmeal sack was rinsed and used for a flour sack, then for a dishcloth, then patched into a child's apron. The whole bag cost 19 cents and stretched into 30 breakfasts. That was the entire shopping list. Number 15. Fried grouse breast on toast. A boy of 14 took a single shot from a .22 caliber rifle into the willows behind the cabin in October and came back with 2 spruce grouse plucked clean by the time he reached the door. His mother filleted the breasts off the bone, dredged them in salted flour, and dropped them into a skillet of hot lard. 2 minutes aside, a squeeze of nothing because there were no lemons in the Yukon, just salt and the savor of the bird. She laid the breasts on 2 slabs of bannock toasted in the same pan, and the boy ate this at the kitchen table before he walked the 4 miles to the school in Carmacks. Grouse breast tasted like nothing else, dense and dark and a little wild, the way a rabbit tastes if you have never eaten rabbit. A hunter could feed his family on grouse alone from August to November, and most Yukon households kept the freezer stocked with 20 birds by Halloween. Number 14. Stewed dried apricots and prunes. Eaton's stewed dried fruit compote. The Eaton's catalog brought a paper sack of dried fruit to every Yukon homestead in the fall order, and that sack was the only fruit a household saw between October and June. A woman soaked a handful of apricots and prunes overnight in cold water, drained them in the morning, and simmered them on the stove with 2 spoons of white sugar and a stick of cinnamon. The fruit plumped back into a sticky calm. Poté, the syrup turned a dark amber, and you spooned the whole thing over a bowl of porridge or a slice of buttered toast. A child grew up associating dried fruit with winter sweetness because there was no other kind. The apple that arrived at Christmas in a wooden crate from British Columbia was a special occasion. The apricots were the everyday. They cost 26 cents a pound in 1954, and a pound stewed up into 8 breakfasts of compote that the children would fight over. Number 13. Beans warmed from the night pot. A Yukon homesteader put a pot of navy beans on the back of the stove on Saturday night, salted with a chunk of salt pork and sweetened with a pour of fancy molasses. The beans cooked overnight in the residual heat of the wood stove, and by Sunday morning, the kitchen smelled like a logging camp. She spooned the beans into a tin bowl with a slab of fried bannock, and a man ate this before church in a kitchen in Watson Lake with the windows so frosted he could not see the road. The beans were cheaper than meat, kept for a week in the cool pantry, and reheated into something even better on Monday. A pound of beans cost 11 cents and fed a family of 5 for 2 days. That was arithmetic that worked. The Klondike beans had simmered in homestead kitchens since the gold rush, the recipe passed down through generations of Yukon mothers. Number 12. Cinnamon toast on home-baked bread. A woman in Whitehorse baked 4 loaves of bread every Wednesday in a wood-fired oven, and by Friday morning, the heels of those loaves were too hard to slice without sawing. She cut them thick anyway, toasted them on a wire rack over the open flame of the cook stove, slathered them with a 1/4 inch of butter, and sprinkled white sugar mixed with cinnamon over the top. The sugar melted into the butter and turned into a glassy caramel crust by the time the slice hit the plate. A child of 9 ate 2 slices and a glass of clim before she walked to school in the dark. The cinnamon came from a tin from Eaton's, the sugar from a paper sack, the butter from a creamery in Edmonton that shipped on the August barge. Every ingredient had traveled 1,000 miles to reach a kitchen in Whitehorse, and a cinnamon toast in 1956 was a small celebration of that long journey. Number 11. Fried bologna and mustard. A round of bologna came up in a wooden crate from Edmonton in August, and a household stored it wrapped in cheesecloth in the cold porch where it kept until Christmas. A man working at the silver mine in Elsa sliced it thick with a butcher knife, dropped 6 slices into a hot, dry skillet, and let them curl up into the shape of little bowls. He cracked 2 eggs into the hollows, dressed the whole plate with a thick smear of yellow mustard, and ate it standing at the bunkhouse counter at 5:15 in the morning. A working breakfast for the man heading underground at 6. He needed 3,000 calories before noon, and this plate gave him half of them. The other half was a thermos of strong black tea and 2 slabs of bannock for the morning break. Number 10. Leftover stew warmed up. The stew had simmered all afternoon Sunday with caribou shoulder, root vegetables, salt, and a bay leaf from a tin can. By Monday morning, the stew had set up like jelly in the cold pantry, and a Yukon mother spooned a thick slab into a cast iron pan with a splash of water. It melted back into a brown gravy in 3 minutes over the stove, and she served it over a plate of fried bannock for the kids before school. A working family did not believe in breakfast food versus dinner food. There was food, and there was no food, and a pot of leftover stew on a January morning was the difference. A hunter's wife in Old Crow could stretch a single shoulder of caribou into 9 breakfasts. The math worked because nothing was thrown out. The bones went into a stock pot, the marrow went onto the children's toast, the broth went into the next pot of beans. Number 9. Soft-boiled eggs in a tin cup. The eggs came up frozen from Edmonton in February, packed in sawdust crates, and sold for 38 cents a dozen at the Hudson's Bay store in Whitehorse. A homesteader paid the price because there was no other way. She dropped 2 eggs into a small pot of boiling water set a clock for 4 minutes, and lifted them out with a slotted spoon. Then she cracked them straight into a tin cup, salted them heavy, and stirred in a knob of butter the size of her thumb. A child ate the soft golden mash with a spoon, the yolks coating every grain of salt, and finished the cup in 3 bites. Eggs were rare enough to be sacred. A family of 6 ate 2 dozen a month in winter and considered it a luxury. By June, the hens at the homestead were laying again, and the price came back down to 10 cents. That tin cup of egg, eaten standing at the kitchen window in February, was the breakfast every Yukon child still dreams about. Number 8. Caribou jerky and TE. A trapper walking his line at -40 in February did not eat a sit-down breakfast. He boiled a kettle of strong black tea on the wood stove at 4 in the morning, poured it into a tin thermos with a heavy splash of carnation milk and 3 sugar cubes, and slid 2 strips of caribou jerky into the pocket of his canvas mackinaw. He ate the jerky on the trail, tearing it with his teeth as the dogs pulled him north into the dark. The jerky had been smoked over willow for 3 days the previous September, salted heavy, and stored in a flour sack in the cold porch. A strip the size of his finger held the energy of a full breakfast and would carry him to the next set of marten traps. The Gwich'in and Han trappers had been carrying dried meat on their lines for 1,000 years before the cast iron kettle and the carnation tin showed up. The tea and the milk were the only colonial additions. Number 7. A hot bannock with butter and molasses. The bannock came out of the cast iron skillet at 6 o'clock in the morning, golden brown and the size of a dinner plate, smelling of bacon fat and wood smoke. A Yukon mother tore it in half with her hands, slathered the cut sides with a 1/4 inch of cold butter, and drizzled fancy molasses over the top in a slow black ribbon. The butter melted into the steaming bread, the molasses pooled into the divots, and a child ate her half in 4 bites with a tin cup of cocoa beside it. This was the breakfast every Yukon child remembers, the one you can taste 50 years later if you close your eyes. The Métis families in the Liard Valley called it la galette and made it the same way their great-grandmothers had taught them, except with rendered moose fat instead of lard. The recipe was simple. The skill was in the pan. A good bannock cook could turn out 4 pans before the sun came up over the spruce. Number 6. Fried mush from leftover porridge. A Yukon homesteader poured Sunday's leftover oatmeal into a loaf pan and set it on the cold porch overnight, where it firmed into a pale brick by morning. She turned it out, sliced it 1/2 inch thick, and dropped the slabs into a skillet of bacon fat. The slices fried up crisp on both sides, the inside staying soft and creamy, and you ate them with a pour of dark molasses and a tin cup of carnation milk. A child of 8 ate 3 slabs and a fried egg in a kitchen in Faro, and walked the 1/2 mile to the bus stop at -30 without a coat unbuttoned. The porridge that had been bland yesterday was incredible today. Nothing was thrown out in a Yukon kitchen. Every leftover became tomorrow's breakfast, and the cycle made the flour sack last longer. A working family ate fried mush twice a week through the long winter and considered it a treat. Number 5. Baking powder biscuits and rendered lard. A woman mixed flour, baking powder, salt, and a heaping spoon of cold lard in a yellow ceramic bowl. She cut the lard in with 2 knives until it looked like coarse sand, and bound the dough with cold milk. She rolled it out on a floured board, cut 12 biscuits with the rim of a tin cup, and slid them into the wood-fired oven for 12 minutes. They came out tall and flaky, and a Yukon child split them open with her thumbs while they were still steaming. A spoon of butter, a pour of strawberry jam from the August preserves, and that was breakfast in a homestead kitchen north of Mayo in 1957. The lard was rendered from a hog the family bought from a farm in Edmonton in October and butchered themselves. Every batch of biscuits used a 1/4 cup. A jar of lard lasted 6 weeks, and a tin of biscuits cooled on the windowsill in plain view of the woodpile and the tied-up sled dogs. Number 4. Dried smoked whitefish and tea. The whitefish came out of Kluan Lake in August, gutted and split, and hung on a wooden rack over a smoker built from old stovepipe. A southern Tuchone family smoked the fish for 10 days over willow and cottonwood, and the finished strips kept in a flour sack all winter without going off. A man working on a road crew along the Alaska Highway pulled 3 strips out of his lunch bucket at 5:30 in the morning, tore them with his teeth, and chased the dense, oily flesh with a tin cup of strong black tea. The fish tasted of smoke and salt and the lake water it had grown up in, and 3 strips kept a working man on his feet through the morning at -35. The indigenous families who taught the road crews this trick had been smoking fish on these racks for centuries before the highway was a line on a survey map. The road crews had borrowed a survival recipe and rebranded it as a working breakfast. Number 3. Fried cream of wheat. A Yukon mother poured leftover cream of wheat into a buttered loaf pan on Sunday night, and by Monday morning, the cereal had set into a smooth white block. She turned it out, sliced it thick, and fried the slabs in a skillet of butter and bacon fat until both sides turned a deep golden brown. A child ate this with a generous pour of maple syrup that came up from Quebec on the August barge. The slabs crisp on the outside and creamy in the middle, the syrup pooling around the edges. The plate was incredible for a child of 6 on a January morning. A pound of cream of wheat cost 19 cents at the Hudson's Bay store in Whitehorse and stretched into 9 breakfasts. The trick was the cold rest overnight. Without that, the slabs fell apart in the pan. With it, they fried like polenta. Your grandmother knew this trick by heart, and she never wrote the recipe down because there was no recipe. There was only the rhythm of a Sunday pot becoming a Monday breakfast. Number 2. Klondike beans for breakfast. The beans had been simmering in a clay crock on the back of the stove since Friday night, layered with salt pork, brown sugar, dry mustard, and a pour of fancy molasses. A trapper working the Stewart River spooned a tin bowl full of beans, laid 2 slabs of fried bannock on top, and ate the whole thing in 5 minutes before he set off to check his martin line at sunrise. The beans held the heat of a full hot meal in every cup, and kept a working man warm at -30 for 6 hours. A pound of dry navy beans cost 12 cents and fed a household of 4 for 2 days. Every Yukon homesteader owned a bean crock, the kind with a heavy lid and the brown glaze that turned darker with each generation. Every Yukon homesteader knew this recipe by heart. That was the entire shopping list. Number 1. Sourdough hotcakes with wild blueberry preserves. The starter had been alive since 1898, fed every day for 57 years by a chain of women who had never let it die. A grandmother in Dawson City stirred it down at 5 o'clock in the morning, mixed in flour, salt, and a pour of clim, and dropped batter the size of a saucer into a hot cast iron skillet greased with bacon fat. The hot cakes came up tangy, dense, and tall, and she stacked 4 of them on a tin plate with a heavy spoon of wild blueberry preserve she had put up in August. The blueberries had grown low to the ground on the slopes above the Stewart River, picked by her granddaughter into a tin lard pail, 1 bucket at a time. The preserves had cost nothing but the August day. A child eating this breakfast in 1956 was eating exactly what a Klondike miner had eaten in 1898. The starter was the same. The blueberries were the same. 9 in 10 Yukon households today eat the same breakfast as Vancouver, Toronto, or Calgary. The starter has died. The Yukon kitchen at 4:30 in the morning in 1955 smelled of wood smoke, bacon fat, and a sourdough starter that had been alive for 57 years. The Yukon kitchen at 4:30 in the morning in 2026 smells of nothing because nobody is awake. The trapper's wife, who knew every breakfast on this list, passed away in 1991, and her cast iron skillet sits in a museum in Whitehorse beside a tin of Klim and a paper sack of Quaker oats. The part that surprised me most about these breakfasts is how few of them needed a recipe. They lived in the hands. Tell us in the comments which breakfast your own grandparents ate in a kitchen north of 60, and where in this country that kitchen sits.